Hi everybody, I'm Chef Susie with Escoffier Online. Welcome to the cast today. Today we're going to be doing our baked cheesecake assessment, which is a cheesecake that is European style. It's going to have a sweet dough crust rather than the American style with the graham cracker crust. And it's going to be in pattern with the Escoffier method of cooking, which has withstood the test of time and you see in kitchens today. So knowing that, let's get started. I have my sanitizing solution, as always. I've got my spray and my bucket with my rag. Whichever one you like to use is just fine. I think that we've been seeing the sprays are more popular. So this is for cleanup before and after the assessment. So knowing that, I'm going to pop it under the table. And I have everything else that I need for the assessment right here, my ingredients, and I have a few things on my back table and the bottom of my table that wouldn't quite fit up here because there's so many for today. Because we're going to be making the crust and then we're going to be making the batter, and then they're both going to be baked separately. So knowing that, let's get started. So we're going to start on our sweet dough crust first, which is the pâté sucré. It's a combination of butter and flour and sugar with a little bit of egg. So knowing that, I'm going to be sifting my flour. Then we're going to make this on the mixer. You can make it by hand. You're really just kind of rubbing the butter into the flour mixture. And it's fine to make by hand, but I'd like to make it on the machine. So I've got my flour sifted. And I've got my unsalted butter, which I have at room temperature, which we're just going to go ahead and put in the bowl. And I've got it cut into small pieces, and I'm just going to start rubbing it in a little bit by hand, and then I'm going to put it on the mixer, and I'm just going to mix it until it's a crumbly consistency. And then I'm going to go ahead and add my sugar and my egg and my vanilla. And it's going to be a little dry, and it's going to look like it's not going to come together, but it will. And what I'll do is I'll put it on the table to work it in. So knowing that, I'm going to start this on the machine with the paddle attachment. Okay, we're going to put this on pretty much a low speed, not too high. So we just want these butter clumps to be rubbed into the flour. It's not going to take long at all. And then we're going to add our liquid ingredients, our egg, our vanilla, and our sugar. So it's becoming nice and crumbly. I still have a few big pieces of butter, so we'll wait just a minute. And when we're finished with this, we're going to leave it rest for about 30 minutes in the refrigerator, and then it's going to be rolled out. And I made a small batch of dough earlier before we came on air, and we'll be rolling that one out because it rested a good 30 minutes in the refrigerator. So I'm going to go ahead and add my sugar. And remember, we're not working the gluten in these pastry recipes. In the bread recipes, we're working the gluten for the elasticity and the chewiness, but these recipes, we want them to remain delicate. So we're going to just mix it as little as we can. So we're going to keep an eye on this. And kind of right before it comes together, we're going to turn it out onto the work surface and finish it up. Okay, we're going to move this out of the way. So I've got my crumbly dough mixture. I'm just going to mix it up a little bit by hand. Still crumbly. It's going to come together. Don't worry about that. It's got enough moisture in it. And then I'm just going to work it together on the table. I'm just pressing it together, and it's coming together to form a nice dough. Then I'm just kind of picking up some of these little straggler pieces with the rest of the dough. And you can just kind of roll it around and pick them up, like I said. And be kind of gentle with it. You're not kneading it like your dough. And if you have any questions, just please let me know. So it came out nicely. It all came together, no worries. I've got a little stuck on the table, so I'm going to use my bench scraper, which comes in really handy, to kind of put it all together. So then we're going to set this aside 30 minutes in the refrigerator, and then we'll go ahead and roll the dough that I made earlier. You want to set it in the refrigerator for 30 minutes so it can cool a little bit, and it's going to be a little bit easier to work. And let that gluten rest a little bit if you've worked it at all. Okay, so knowing that, we're going to set this aside. So I've got my dough that I made earlier. It's a little cool because it was in the refrigerator. And we're going to roll it right on the work surface with a little bit of all-purpose flour. And I've got my brush handy in case I get a little too much flour on the dough, and then I can brush it off. So you don't want to get too much flour on there. So we're just going to carefully roll it to maybe about 1/8 of an inch thick. And you can also roll the dough between 2 pieces of parchment paper or 2 pieces of plastic wrap too, whichever you like. I kind of like rolling it on the table. So that's kind of how we're going to do it. And then we're going to line our springform pan. And then we're going to be blind baking this with a little bit of weight with some rice and a little bit of plastic to line it. And when you're blind baking this, you don't have to dock the bottom of it. So we don't want any holes in the bottom. Oops, I got a little piece of dough stuck on my rolling pin, but we can easily put it back together. So we're not going to dock the dough because we don't want to create any holes that cheesecake mixture can kind of poke through. So it looks like we have a good piece of dough here. And I'm just going to trim around just to make it a little bit more manageable when I actually put it in the pan. So I'm just going to pick this up and put it in the pan, and then we're going to trim it so it's about 1/3 of the way up the pan. So I've got a little bit of stickiness, but not too much. And I'm just going to gently pick it up and just kind of push it in there a little bit. If you have some creases, just kind of pinch them together. That's bound to happen. We have a little bit of excess dough here. So we'll kind of just pinch that together. So with the sweet doughs, the recipes do vary a lot. So just use the one that you like and that you feel more comfortable with. So now that I've got the dough in the pan, I'm just going to give it a trim. So it's about 1/3 of the way up. And then we're going to put our weight in for our blind baking. And just be mindful, since you're putting a cheesecake mix in here, that you don't have any holes. If you see any holes in the creases, just go ahead and pinch them together. So there we have our shell. Let's kind of pinch that. We have a little stubborn piece there, but not too bad. And this dough, you can go ahead and re-roll it, just refrigerate it. And then you can use it again to make maybe some little tartlets or pretty much anything. Okay. So we're going to clean off our work area a little bit here with our bench scraper. And then we're going to go ahead and put our weight in. And I saved the rice that I've been using for my weight. And then we'll just go ahead and use that. So I've got my rice, and I'm going to line it with some plastic. I like to use plastic wrap when I'm blind baking, but you can use parchment paper. Some people even use aluminum foil. And I find that parchment paper sometimes dries and it flakes a little bit. So I like to use my plastic wrap. I'm just going to go ahead and line my pan. And then I'm just going to pour my rice weight in. And we're going to bake this at 350 degrees for about maybe 20 minutes, maybe 25, depending on your oven. Keep an eye on it, because remember, you do own it once you put it in the oven. It's going to get a little golden brown on the edge. And I like to pull my weight out maybe 5 minutes before it's done and just let it bake a little bit on its own so it dries out a little bit. So I'm going to pop this in the oven. Okay, and we have a question.
Doesn't the plastic wrap melt in the oven?
The question is, does the plastic wrap melt in the oven? It won't melt in the oven. Plastic has a very high melting temperature, and it's not going to melt in that 350-degree oven. It'll shrink up and tighten up a little bit, which will make it easier to pull that rice off in the end. But no, it won't melt. And we have another question.
What is the purpose of the weight?
The question is, what is the purpose of the weight? It's so the ends of the shell don't fall down during the baking. It gives them some stability so they can start getting a little bit hard during the baking and kind of hold their own. And also so you don't get buckles and bubbles in your crust. You want it to be nice and smooth, and then it's going to have a real clean look. So knowing that, I have a crust that I baked earlier, blind baked. As you can see, it's nice and smooth, and it has a nice golden brown color. So we're going to go ahead and make our cheesecake mix, and then we're going to fill our crust. So when I'm using cream cheese, I like to use the paddle attachment for the mixer. So we're going to go ahead and put our cream cheese on the machine. And we're going to be creaming this with half of the sugar. And then we're going to save the other half for the egg white mixture, which is the meringue. So I'm going to go ahead and pour half of the sugar over. And then I'm going to start creaming it before I add my cornstarch and my lemon. Okay, we're just going to start that on kind of a slow speed. And then we're going to add our cornstarch, our lemon, and our egg yolks. And we're going to we have our egg whites set aside for our meringue mixture. So we're just going to let this mix a little bit. And to start it out, we're going to scrape it down. And then we'll go ahead and add our cornstarch and our lemon, and then lastly our egg yolks, one at a time. We have another question.
Is there a difference in flavor and texture when you use a baked recipe for cheesecake versus a non-baked recipe?
Good question. The question is there a difference between texture and consistency compared to the baked cheesecake and the refrigerator cheesecake? Yes, there's a really big difference. The refrigerator cheesecakes are set using whipped cream, which stays completely inflated, and also usually some gelatin. And it's kind of almost more like a moussey consistency, where these baked cheesecakes are a little bit richer and they're a little bit denser too. So it's really what you like. It's great to learn both in case you ever need to use them. So I'm adding the rest of my lemon, and then we're going to scrape this down. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to add our egg yolks one at a time. So this is a really nice baked cheesecake recipe. It has a great lemon flavor to it. It's not too sweet, and it's got that nice sweet dough crust. And we're going to be folding in the meringue and the whipped cream, which are going to add a little bit of airiness to it. And we have another question. The question is, can you use the mascarpone cheese? The mascarpone cheese is an Italian cheese, and it's considered a triple cream cheese, just as the cream cheese is. But for these cheesecakes, I wouldn't recommend it. I would just go ahead and use the cream cheese. With the mascarpone cheese, since there's so much cream in it, mixing it like this actually has the same effect as making whipped cream. It can actually whip up on you and actually break. So there are mascarpone recipes, and I would stick with those, but for this one in particular, I would stay with the cream cheese. So we're going to mix our eggs in one at a time, and we're just going to carefully be scraping our bowl down, because we don't want any lumps, especially with cream cheese, because once you get lumps, they're really hard to get out. And remember, this cream cheese is at room temperature, and it makes it so much easier to mix in. So when it's cold, it's kind of hard, and it's a little more difficult. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to add the rest of our egg yolks, and then we're going to scrape this down again. And we have another question.
Can you bake a graham cracker crust if you want to substitute?
The question is about a graham cracker crust. Can you bake a graham cracker crust in this recipe? Can you substitute a graham cracker crust in this recipe? I think it would really work out just fine. I think that you'd be fine with that, but for your assessment, like we talked about before, make sure that you follow the criteria of the assessment and make the recipe the way that it is. Then you have it under your belt, you know what it's supposed to look like and taste like, and then you can kind of start with your own variations after that. So I've scraped the bowl down well, and I'm just going to mix this a little bit more to make sure that it's all incorporated. Then we're going to take it off the machine and mix our heavy cream as well as our egg whites to make our meringue. And we have another question.
Can you add fruit inside the cheesecake when you bake it?
I didn't hear you.
Can you add fruit inside the cheesecake when you bake it?
The question is, can you add fruit inside the cheesecake before you bake it? You can add some fruits, but you really don't want to add any fruits that have a lot of water in them, like strawberries, pineapples, oranges. I would recommend maybe adding some dried fruits, or you can even add chocolate chips, which are very popular. And you could even make a rum raisin cheesecake, which would be nice. So cheesecake is just a really nice thing. There's so many variations to it, and you can do so many things. So like I said, once you have this under your belt, you'll be able to do a lot with it. So I've got my cheesecake base here. It's nice and smooth. I'm just kind of scraping down my bowl a little bit. And then we're going to start making our whipped cream and mixing our egg whites for our meringue. And we have another question.
My mixer has a bowl scraper attached to the blade. Is that efficient enough?
The question is it's about a paddle attachment blade which has a scraper on it. And those are newer paddles, and they go closer to the edge than the older ones, and their purpose is to do the scraping for you, but be mindful that you really need to get in there and do some of your own scraping too, because there's some areas in the top where the paddle is not going to touch. So I would just get in the habit of doing some of your scraping too. The paddle attachment is going to be great for you, and it's going to make things a lot easier, but definitely get in there and check things out. So knowing that, let's get started on our whipped cream and our egg whites. So what we're going to do is mix the egg whites on the machine while I mix the whipped cream by hand, and then we'll be folding both into our cream cheese mixture for our cheesecake. And we have another question.
Doesn't excessive mixing cause cracks when it's baking?
Does excessive mixing cause cracks when it's baking? Usually the cracks are caused by dry heat. And some cheesecakes are baked in a water bath, which bakes them gently and slowly, and you won't get any cracking. But typically those cracks are caused by the dry heat. And actually the cheesecake that I baked today has some cracks in the top of it from the dry heat. So that's a very typical sign of that. So knowing that, let's get started on our egg whites. And we're going to put these on the machine with the whisk attachment. We're going to put all 3 of them in here. And then we're going to add about half of our sugar in the beginning. And then when they come up, we're going to go ahead and add the other half so it's not weighted down. So this is going to take a little while. So in the meantime, I'm going to be whisking the cream by hand. You can also do the cream on the machine, but I thought it would be nice to just carefully whisk it by hand while the egg whites are working on their own. And we have a question.
Do you add cocoa powder or use real chocolate for chocolate cheesecake?
The question is about chocolate cheesecake. Do you add cocoa powder or are you going to use real chocolate? In chocolate cheesecake that I make, I typically use real chocolate. I'll temper some of the cheesecake mixture into the melted chocolate, but there are recipes that call for cocoa powder. It's just whatever the recipe calls for, which you have. So this is a small amount of cream, and it should whisk pretty fast for us. And I'm going to be keeping an eye on our egg white mixture. It's just starting to come up a little bit, and we just want there to be a nice smooth peak. We don't want it to be dry at all. And I know the mixer is a little bit loud, but I'll try to talk over it. Okay, we have another question.
Do you have to add egg whites to cheesecake?
The question is about adding egg whites to the cheesecake. Do you have to add the egg whites to the cheesecake? No, you don't. There's a lot of recipes where there's just whipped cream in it that's whipped, and then there's a lot of recipes that the whipped cream actually isn't whipped, or the egg whites. So knowing that, I'm going to be adding the rest of my sugar to my egg whites because they're starting to come up. Then I'm just going to increase the speed a little bit to go ahead and mix the rest of that air in. Okay, the egg whites are just about mixed, and we have another question.
There are different shapes and sizes of whisk. When you use a balloon whisk or wooden plate, or can you use the thinner, longer whisk? Will one do the job faster or better?
Okay, our egg whites are just about finished mixing. I'm going to finish them off so we can turn off our noisy mixer. They're just about done. So they're a nice soft peak. This is exactly how we like them, so they fold in easily. And the question is about the whisk used for heavy cream or anything for hand whisking. Anything delicate, you can definitely use a balloon whisk, which is usually a little bit thinner, a little bit more delicate, and it aerates the cream a lot better. So any thin whisk will work. And I'm just using a small thin whisk, and this cream is just about whipped. I don't want to whip it dry. I want to whip it to a nice loose kind of soft peak so it folds in nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and fold my cream into the mixture. And after this is completely incorporated, I'm going to go ahead and fold in my egg white meringue mixture. So this is going to make your cheesecake nice and airy, and you're going to find that you're going to come across a lot of different cheesecake recipes, and it's just going to be you using the one that you like the most. This is a really nice recipe that you'll have for a very long time. And it's kind of a little bit on the thicker side, so if you were to put some chocolate chips in here, it would suspend very well. So knowing that, we're going to go ahead and add our meringue mixture. Just going to gently fold these in. So like I said, it's not whipped dry at all. It's just kind of whipped to a real loose peak. So I'm just gently folding from the bottom, bringing the batter up to the top. And I'm just going to keep with this motion until I have all of these egg whites folded in. And the cheesecake is going to go in a 285-degree oven, a little bit lower than the tart shell. It's going to bake in between 40 and 15 minutes, and you'll be able to touch the top to feel the firmness. So this is nice and fluffy and aerated, and I'm going to be turning it into my pan. Let's kind of move some of these things off our table. And we're going to put it into our blind baked crust. And then I'm going to be putting it in the oven. And then we're going to go ahead and plate up one of the cheesecakes that I made earlier. So you're going to want to smooth out the top. And it's just going to get a little bit golden brown on the sides when it's finished. So I'm going to pop it in the oven. And I'll be checking on it later. And I have another question.
Could you bake it on a higher temp?
The question is, can you bake it on a higher temp? I wouldn't. I would bake this on that low temp, let it just work slowly, and let it work on its own. If you bake it too high, it might bake a little bit too fast on the outside, and then that inside might not bake for you. So I've got the cheesecake that I baked earlier, and it's got a few little cracks on the top, but that's okay. Once we plate it up and decorate it, it's going to go unnoticed. And I have a cartouche for the top, which is also known as a stencil. And I'm just going to be placing it on the top, and I'm going to be putting some powdered sugar on the top, and it's going to take the shape of the stencil. So this is a nice cheesecake recipe. The crust is nice and crispy, and it really has a great lemon flavor. I think that you'll really enjoy it. So I'm gently going to lift off the stencil, also known as the cartouche, and then we just have a really nice cheesecake decoration. And I'm just going to cut a slice and we'll plate it, and all of those little cracks will be covered. So I've got some raspberry coulis and some fresh strawberries and some fresh raspberries to use for my garnish. And with cheesecakes and with pretty much all of your pastry items that you're cutting, you're going to want to make sure that your knife is really clean every cut that you make. So you're always going to want to wash your knife with some water. If you're in a commercial kitchen, you'll probably have a container of water on your station or close by. So I'm just going to carefully cut a wedge out of here. And just be mindful to cut all the way through to this crust. You can actually feel it snap in the bottom. I'm going to clean off my knife so I get a nice clean cut the best that I can. If you don't clean off your knife, you're just going to get some cheesecake debris on the top, and it's just going to look kind of sloppy. So we're going to just carefully pull our cheesecake piece out. for our little plate up here. And I've got a little bit of raspberry coulis that we're just going to put on the end. And this is just a puree of raspberry with a little bit of lemon and some sugar in it. And I strained out the raspberries. And I also added just a few strawberries for a little extra flavor and some extra color. You can also put some blackberries in your raspberry coulis. That's going to make it nice too. And then I'm just going to do some careful dotting with some caramel sauce that I had. Any sauce will do. Chocolate goes really nice with this too. It's a nice complement to this. So I'm just going to put a little raspberry on top and a few raspberries around the plate. And then I'm just going to take one of these strawberries and just fan it, and then we're just going to put that on top to finish it off, and that'll be our plate up. So there you have just a really simple, elegant cheesecake that you can make, and you can make it in different shapes and sizes. You don't always have to use a round pan. You can use a square pan and cut it into squares or even triangles, or you can set them on their sides. So have some fun playing around with it. And now we're going to keep up with our new tradition of talking about our premium cordial, which they go nicely with desserts at the end of the meal. And the cordials are also really nice for using with your desserts, making mousses and soaking cakes. So today, I have some little chocolate cups, which we can fill with the liqueurs. And I have this nice Godiva chocolate, which is a premium liqueur. And it's based on the Godiva chocolates, which are very exquisite. They were introduced in 1926. They've been around for a long time, withstood the test of time. And you can use these little cups, and they're kind of nice if you put a little raspberry in the bottom with one of these liqueurs, especially this one, the chocolate one. And then just go ahead and put a little liqueur in. And these are really nice to serve with dessert for your friends after your meal. And this is also another really nice cordial that you can just drink by itself or on ice. And a lot of drinks are made with this, and especially some really neat chocolate martinis. It's great for soaking cakes, and it's great for making mousses and ice creams too. And I also have the amaretto, the Gozo amaretto, which is a really cool amaretto. It's kind of modern. It's made by a different process. It's not a sticky liqueur at all. It's more pure and clean, and it's made with burnt sugar and almonds and some citrus fruits. And this is really nice. It's something a little bit different. It's a little different amaretto than you're used to. It has a really clean, sparkly flavor to it. And this is a product of Italy, and it's made in the northern region of Italy near Milan and Lake Como. So it's really cool that it came here all the way from Italy just for us. So if you don't have any more questions, we're going to say goodbye for today, and we'll see you next week. And thank you for joining us. And if you're interested in the recipe, it's going to be posted on our Facebook account. So you'll have the cheesecake recipe and the sweet dough recipe for the base. So thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.